All right, we are back. We are looking at tradition 9 for today, which I'm really excited about. And this one could be a little like, what are we talking about? And it seems boring and dry, but to me, it's very exciting. Um, my name is Devin. I am an alcoholic. I do have a home group. It's in Brooklyn, New York. It is called No Serenity Till Brooklyn. And we have 4 meetings a week, although we might have to move that to 3. We're having one meeting that we're starting to question if we're actually supporting it as a group, where we're just struggling to get some service participation. And because it's a smaller meeting financially, it's not really pulling its own weight. So the group's kind of assessing, is it worth us keeping it for now? But um, I've got a sobriety date, which is August 28th of 2011, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And and yeah, and I've done, I've sat down with a past delegate, a couple of different past delegates over the years from different areas, and talk shop through the traditions and the 12 concepts. And I've done work with my own sponsor, who has done a bunch of stuff around workshops with taking the traditions and applying them in our personal lives and looking at them in our marriages and in our families. And so, what I've tried to do with what we're doing here is to just take a moment to talk a little bit about the historical understanding of where these traditions came from, why they came into existence in the first place, talk a little bit about how they apply in our home groups, talk a little bit about how these things can, just apply in AA in general, and then to take a look at, what are we actually, maybe what's the principle here that would be applicable to all of our relationships. And I think the understanding underneath all of this is that the one thing that alcoholics seem to struggle with the most is relationships. Um, I can tell you from my personal experience as a sponsor that most of the phone calls I have with the guys that I'm working with today, because most of us at this point we're adults, we're in some kind of state of having a family or having a partner, that almost every phone call these days is involving us applying this program to our family lives, into our relationships with others, whether it's coworkers, whether it's members of AA and friends, whether it's our wives or partners or our children. We just, relationships for alcoholics are not easy. And our Bill wrote in our 12 and 12 that, you know, it's page 53, I believe, in the 12 and 12, but he wrote that, let me find it. It is from our twisted relations with friends and family and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. We've been especially stupid and stubborn about them. The primary fact is that we fail to recognize the primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. Our egomania digs two disastrous pitfalls. Either we insist upon dominating the people we know, or we depend upon them far too much. And I've seen that over and over again in my own life, and I've seen that over and over again in the lives of many people that I've been able to try to help over the years. And so these traditions are asking for us to give things up within AA as AA members. They're asking for us to put the idea that AA is more important than me, and start trying to live that in my community where I'm getting sober. Because hopefully the understanding here is what we've said over and over again. The first tradition by itself seems to have less to talk about, but now we're still on tradition 9. And what are we talking about? That the most important thing here is that AA continues to function and that we have unity. And so we need to figure out how to build unity here and how to build an effective structure where we can operate so that alcoholics can continue to come and continue to find the gift that we were given, which is a path to freedom from alcoholism. And to be able to have a program that we can utilize, and to be able to have a fellowship that we can attend. And so we've talked about group conscience. We've talked about, we don't have membership requirements. We've talked about self-governance. We've talked about primary purpose and staying focused. We've talked about the dangers then for the last 3 weeks of what starts to maybe push us away from our primary purpose, which would be, us getting affiliated with outside entities, taking on their, giving our name to some kind of outside entity or somebody in business wanting to use AA to prop themselves up, or us potentially thinking that we can go into business and how that could give us money, property, prestige, authority, that's going to divert us from trying to get a drunk sober for fun and for free. We've talked about that we must be self-supporting. And if we're not self-supporting, that can put us susceptible to outside influence. And we looked at how that can be applied in our family lives, how there's more than just financial self-support. There's spiritual self-support and emotional self-support. And we were talking last week about what it means to be non-professional, that we're amateurs here. That in AA, I'm not a professional therapist or a professional clinician. I could work in that field. We talked about how the eighth tradition does not bar me from going out and getting a degree and working as a clinician or a mental health professional that would specialize in alcoholism or addiction. That's totally fine. And many of our members actually do that and get inspired to go help people and see that as a real avenue to go in and be able to put a new career together. And our the basis of that tradition says, hey, if your experience is as an alcoholic and your experience in recovery could benefit other people in a professional field, go do that. But what we were really talking about was to always make sure you know where you are. That if you are working as a mental health professional or you're working in the field of addiction and alcoholism and treatment, that when you're there, you're not an AA member. I mean, you are an AA member because you're an AA member, but you're not representing Alcoholics Anonymous and those people that you meet as a professional clinician or as a tech at a rehab center. They're meeting you and that's your job title. So they're not looking at you as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in that role. They're meeting you in a professional capacity, and that's, you have this title and you're getting paid. And so the work that you do there is not the service work and the 12-step work that's going to keep you sober. That's just what you happen to do for a career, and it overlap there looks like what we do in AA helping newcomers. So as long as you make sure you have a home group, have service going on, and are sponsoring people and work in this program, you can definitely do that and just draw that line. So I did that for a little bit. And whenever I ran a group where they wanted me to talk about 12-step recovery, I walked in and said, I am one of the clinicians here. And when I go into a prison or a hospital or a psych ward, and I'm an AA member carrying a meeting into that place, when I open that meeting, I introduce myself as an alcoholic. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not affiliated with this facility in any way. We are not paid. We are not staff. We are just some drunks that are allowed off the street to come in here and do a meeting with you because at some point this facility expressed an interest in having Alcoholics Anonymous be a part of, bringing you guys a message. And so for me, those two things are really simple, but also something to be mindful of. And now we get to one of my favorite traditions, which is Tradition 9. And Tradition 9 reads, AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. And then the long form digs way deeper, as we're seeing these last couple of traditions, like 6 is way longer, 7 is way longer, 9, another one that's way expanded in the long form. So the long form looks like this. Each AA group needs the least possible organization. Rotating leadership is the best. The small group may elect its secretary. The large group, its rotating committee. And the groups of a large metropolitan area, their central or intergroup committee, which often employs a full-time secretary. The trustees of the General Service Board are, in effect, our AA General Service Committee. They are the custodians of our AA tradition and the receivers of voluntary AA contributions by which we maintain our AA General Service Office in New York. They are authorized by the groups to handle our overall public relations, and they guarantee the integrity of our principal newspaper, the AA Grapevine. I shouldn't laugh at that, but that's really funny. All such representatives are to be guided in the spirit of service, for true leaders in AA are but trusted and experienced servants of the whole. They derive no real authority from their titles. They do not govern. Universal respect is the key to their usefulness. So that's a whole mouthful over the short form, right? The short form, we need ought never be organized, but we'll get service boards and committees directly responsible to the membership they serve. And then here in the long form, you're going in and starting to get a picture of what that might look like. So in a nutshell, what we're talking about here is organization would mean, think about like a corporation. How many of us work for like a larger company that has like a, a CEO and then board of directors, or they have the executive officers, the chief financial officer, the chief technology officer, the CEO, and then you move down and you got the managers, right? And the different people that are there overseeing the smaller companies. And so they're saying that in AA, we're not organized like that. And we've seen this like in our group conscience and tradition too, that God is the ultimate authority in AA. That we're not organized like a corporation, that people who do service in Alcoholics Anonymous are servants. They're not governing with an iron fist, meaning they can't tell you what to do. And so that's kind of what this is saying. It's like, we're not going to be organized in the sense where we're going to have someone who's the leader of AA, but we're going to have a board that serves Alcoholics Anonymous. And so the essay, I want to read a little bit because the essay is so great. This is one of my favorite little essays here. But they talk about how we need the least possible organization, and then we ultimately change our mind to we should never be organized at all. And people don't get it. They go, how could you ever pull this off? Like, we all need to have organization. Like, this is anarchy if you guys are just running around doing whatever you want to do as members. Like, you need something to, kind of keep you in line. And they basically, Bill basically puts it forward and he goes, but AA is the exception. We don't conform to the pattern of having somebody giving us directives and orders from up above us and telling us what to do. And even though we have a board of trustees and we have a intergroup central office, they work for us. We don't work for them. And so they can't give us a directive or any kind of direction. You guys have a group. I'm assuming everybody in here has a home group. Raise hand. We have home group. Yeah. We have a meeting we attend. A trustee in your area cannot show up to your group and tell you you're doing it wrong. I mean, they could try to tell you that, and you could just tell them to go stick it in their ear and kick them out of the meeting. They don't have, your delegate can't show up and tell you you're doing something wrong. I mean, again, they could try. But the way AA is unorganized is the fact that the groups and the members sit at the top. That is, right now, all of us are AA members. And that is the highest level of AA you can get. If you start doing service and you become a delegate, you are descending down. And what we call is you're doing service below the group level. And so let me just, before I pull Karthik in here, let me just show you this. Can everybody see this? This is an inverted triangle, right? This graph right here. And what you see here at the top is the AA group. Then below the group, you see group GSR, which means General Service Representative. Below that, you see districts. Then you see area assemblies. Then you see the delegates of the General Service Conference. Then at the bottom of this triangle, you see General Service Board. And then these two little squares are the logos for AA World Services and AA Grapevine. So this is how AA is unorganized or organized. that the group is the top. And the farther you go into service, the more responsibilities you might have, but the less you have no authority at all. And so that's what we mean by unorganized. It's not you become a trustee and now you can go around and make sweeping policy changes like the president of a country or the leader of a nation could do or the CEO of a company can do. This is about service. And so AA is like this enigma where everywhere else in the world it would be flipped, that the members and the groups would be at the bottom as like the lowest form, and then you'd go up and you'd have more power, so that if Bill put this together where he was in charge of AA, then whatever Bill says is going to happen is going to happen. But if you look at how Bill tried to live and work this thing out, he kept trying to give everything back to everybody else, and he just wanted to be a member. Go ahead, Karthik.
Yeah, regarding this, I think I heard from you probably the New York area committee or somebody like that, when a group was not following traditions and they did invite the group, GSI, I guess, and tell them, the problem you haven't been right next door at the same time. And they didn't listen. They removed them from the group meeting list that the area. Isn't that voting this tradition?
So I think you're referring to my buddy who started a meeting in the same church at the same time as a long-standing group. And he wanted to create one of the things that we don't have out here in the New York City area is most speaker meetings are like somebody comes in for 15 or 20 minutes, kind of gives a rough sketch of their experience drinking, and then it just becomes the next 30 minutes is everybody just raising their hands and talking about whatever they want. They call that format speaker discussion. To me, it's dreadful. It's an awful meeting format. It brings almost nothing to the table most of the time, because you'll just have a bunch of people kind of talk about how drunk they got, and then everybody else will just kind of talk about themselves and their problems, and it usually meanders off into some kind of weird non-discussion. In my opinion, today where I'm at, I want a topic, I want something rooted in literature, I want some focus to the meeting, and a lot of times with that format you don't. But in other parts of our country, a speaker meeting is you get someone and they speak for the hour. They tell their story and they take the whole hour. And the idea with that is, that's usually where you're going to hear not just the getting drunk part, but also the getting sober part. And so my friend wanted to start a meeting where it was an hour speaker, because it didn't exist in New York area really. And he wanted to go bring a bunch of speakers from all over the country that speak at conferences, and really try to like have this big party once a week. And um, so the thing is, it wasn't AA, the board of trustees of the general service office is a completely separate entity. Like AA general services and what I'm going to talk about with how we're organized is completely different to how the New York central office or the New York intergroup functions. Central offices do not exist in this graph that I just showed you. If you look in here, nowhere in here do you see a central office. The central offices, or what we call intergroups sometimes. So in New York, it's New York intergroup. There's also a Queens intergroup and a Brooklyn intergroup, because those are large boroughs with millions of people, and there's people on more of the outside of those geographical areas that felt like they weren't getting served by the office in Manhattan. So they started their own, they organize in their own way. And again, that's fine. We're not organized telling you can or can't do that. So the fact that we have New York intergroup that's supposed to serve all 5 boroughs in Westchester, and now Queens says we're going to have our own office, and Brooklyn says we're going to have our office. Well, fine. We can't tell anybody not to do that. If a group of people want to get together and do that, they're doing that. So the only recourse that could happen in that situation, and we talked about this around tradition 4 and autonomy, and this idea of, part of a meeting's function is it should be a good neighbor, that we're not trying to slice the pie up and steal membership or steal seventh tradition contributions from other groups. But the reality is we're all here together, and we need to support each other. And so starting a meeting at the exact same time in the same location is a long-standing meeting that's been kind of struggling with a smaller group of people in attendance seems like not really being a good neighbor. And the way that our central office works is that a group has to be a group for 90 days, and then they submit a form saying, we're a new group and we're letting you know. And here's the secretary's info and the chair's info, or the group, the general service. Like, here's some contact information for the people. Here's where we meet. Here's the time. Here's the format. We would like this information public on the website and in the meeting book, because we used to print meeting books a lot. And so it was like you'd have to basically submit after you've been a group for 90 days that you were now a functioning group and you'd like to be added to the meeting list. And when that request came for this group, the speaker meeting that my buddy was trying to start, and the other group was in attendance. The representative for the central office for the group called the prospect group that was been in that space for over 30 years. They kind of said, look, we've had a meeting at the same time in the basement of this church for 30 years. And, these guys didn't even come and talk to us or ask us. They're trying to sell a bunch of CDs. It really looks like a weird, because my friend tried to run it like a mini conference. So they had speaker tapes out for sale and, flyers of conferences. And, he was trying to make it like a big thing. And as an AA group goes, these people were like, we've never seen anything like this. Doesn't really look like an AA meeting. We think something weird is going on. And so that body did not vote to approve the addition of his group into the meeting list. But that meeting continued to meet until it fell apart. And that's kind of the deal, right? There's no real recourse. You could have somebody come in and say, hey, we're not going to list your meeting publicly. And you could say, well, that's fine. But that doesn't mean you guys can't meet. Nobody can come in and tell you can't do it. And ultimately, here's what happens. The reason we had the traditions was so the meetings wouldn't fall apart. And my buddy's meeting fell apart in short order. It did not stay a group. It is not, it lasted a couple of months and then it fell apart because he wasn't really in any way abiding by our traditions. And he didn't organize it in the way that a group would need to be organized. He didn't get other people involved to do service. He just kind of, I'm going to make this happen and throw some money at it, and we're going to do it like a business person. And it failed. And I think that's what we see here is that if we don't actually try to hew
Yeah,
to
but
these traditions, the groups won't last. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, a group in at least in our structure is part of the structure. You're saying
So,
intergroups are not part of structure?
yeah, they're not part of the structure at all. It's a completely separate entity
No,
so
here,
the AA General Service is actually the entity, like our General Service Board and our General Service Conference is the service board that we've created that's directly responsible to our fellowship. That's what the long form says. It says our board of
yeah, but
trustees is seen as the AA General Service Committee. So that is the committee that's responsible for if we're going to update literature, like a fifth edition big book, or we're gonna change. We need a new pamphlet. We need to update the corrections material. We have a video that goes into the correctional facilities for public information from the corrections committee to let professionals within that world understand what AA is. And it's from the 70s or the 80s. So we think we should update that. The discussions about those kinds of things happen in the General Service Conference. But we lost Karthik. I'll I'll answer the question though. So there, all right, he's back. Well, wait a sec. I think he's back. I don't see the ID yet for the audio. So the long and the short of it, okay, I think we're back. So the long and the short of it is the conference is responsible for the big systemic policy, like the board is responsible for the overarching policies and operations of our corporate boards that are doing the printing of the books and the printing of the magazine. So once a year when we have a general service conference, it's like imagine doing a business meeting for an entire week at your home group. That's what the general service conference is. It is 10-hour days in committees with, your committee assignment as a delegate, talking about literature or corrections or public information stuff, what needs to be updated, what do we need to do so that we can better enable our members to have the resources they need to go out and be able to do 12-step service. Like that should be the intent, I think, of our conference. Um, and the central offices are there for when like a member or a potential member, maybe a drunk, is dying and needs to talk to somebody in their area and find a meeting. That's what the central offices are about. It was described to me that the central offices of the intergroups should be like the boots on the ground, like they are doing 12-step service in the community. We are answering the phones at New York Intergroup and people go, I'm a drunk and I need help and I need a meeting. And we go, where are you located? And we try to get them to a meeting, or we have a list of people that we could try to get them connected with and do a 12-step call. We have a committee that's actively, organizing, sending people into facilities. The General Service Board or office cannot do that for my city, even though the office is in my city. That's the work of the central offices, but they don't exist within the actual service structure of AA. The intergroups and the central offices are their own separate entity. And that's where a lot of people get confused because they don't realize that they're not, that the intergroups are a completely separate thing. They don't exist within the service structure. But almost every major city has a central office and an intergroup that's supported by the groups because the groups see the necessity of having an office that can actually organize and execute the work that needs to get done for 12-step service in the actual community that you live in. Now, sometimes that gets blurred in certain parts of our country. The areas are the ones that do all that stuff. Like out in Western New York and like the Buffalo area, it's like the area does everything because they didn't really get a central office up. So the area's committees actually are the ones that handle a lot of that stuff. But I think in this country, when you get into most populated towns and areas, it's not the area committees that are doing that work as much as the intergroups or the central offices. Um, but regardless, all this is saying that the membership gets to decide what's going on. The membership, as a member, you are at the top. There is no CEO that can tell you. The trustees can't tell you how to do this program. They're not going to trump your sponsor. They can't tell your group how to function and operate. You guys have, as we've discussed, autonomy to be self-governing and to have your own group conscience that mets out what you guys want to do. Go ahead, Karthik.
Yeah. So here, I think I'm not sure, but I think intergroups are treated, uh, intergroups are treated as part of the service structure.
Do they
At
vote?
least,
Does your intergroup vote? It's your area assembly. Does your intergroup people have a vote?
no, it's the
Then they are not
GSR.
a part of it.
Okay, okay,
That's it.
got it.
What I'm talking about is who's voting here. The intergroups do great work, but they don't exist within the traditional structure of AA, which is group, general service rep,
The
district,
mhm.
area, delegate to the conference, board. There's no other line in there. The central offices do a bunch of amazing work, but my home group is told to have a general service rep and an intergroup delegate. And the work of the intergroups are they put together the meeting list, we run the website and the meeting finder for our area. We have a few events throughout the year, and we have some committees there that organize specific to the 5 boroughs in Westchester, mailing list to schools to do public information. And then we have the CTFC, or Corrections and Treatment Facilities Committee, which tries to do its best to work with the members from the counties that take up those chair positions and organize, the spreadsheets of who's going into what facility and what facilities still have open committee or commitments, so that we can try to get groups and AA members to take up those requests and take meetings onto Rikers Island, to take meetings into all the different hospitals, and to figure out where AA has been requested. But they don't go to the
So
general service or to the area assembly and cast a vote. We would cooperate. Our area assembly
yeah,
has an intergroup liaison, and we have a liaison to the area on intergroup. So the communication is hopefully there, but they're two separate things. And it could be different where you're at, but this is how it works over here. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, yeah, even though it don't vote, but how can they remove a meeting from a meeting list? That's still I still think it's a violation of the fourth and this tradition. They shouldn't be having, that right? To remove a meeting from a meeting list.
Well, the meeting list is the like sole responsibility of the intergroup delegates and the intergroup. And if the delegates voted by group conscience not to put a meeting into that list because they did not feel that that meeting was abiding by the AA traditions, then that group would never get listed. And the times where meetings were somewhat delisted were meetings that had rewritten the tradition or the steps and had removed God from it and removed alcohol from it. And there was a whole issue in Toronto where the Toronto central office was actually delisted by AA World Services over here from the global directory because they were allowing a bunch of meetings that had rewritten the 12 steps to be called Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was a whole discussion about, is this affecting AA as a whole? And then that got really messy. There was a whole legal action. The guys in Toronto actually won the legal suit and said it was, religious persecution. And it was a whole mess for a while. But, so it may not be the greatest thing to have done by AA standards. The General Service Office took Toronto Intergroup off of their directory for a little bit. Um, but, this is the kind of deal. We're not organized. There is no leader. It's the members getting together and having a group conscience. And so for that meeting to not get listed in the directory was because the group conscience of the intergroup delegates meeting that quarter that was looking at the new meeting submissions, looked at what was going on, listened to the delegate from the meeting that had been in that space for 40 years. And that body of delegates voted with substantial unanimity to go back and tell that my friend that they weren't going to put his meeting publicly in the database. And that was
Okay,
following
so
all of our traditions.
yeah, so the you again intergroup has the delegates separately, like or are there the GSRs that go to the
I
intergroup?
mean, over here we call them intergroup delegates or intergroup reps, which is just the GSR, but to the intergroup. It's the members of the home groups that go together. There's quarterly meetings of art for New York intergroup, and you get a bunch of the different meetings with the representative from that meeting that get together and they discuss whatever business needs to be discussed of intergroup. You get it's kind of like an assembly. You get a 6 or 7 hour business meeting 4 times a year on the business of New York intergroup. And we have a steering committee, and there's the executive director, and there's a couple of staff, and everybody's there, and everybody gives reports from the steering committee about what's going on, and then we get to hear reports from the intergroup delegates, and so they get to come in and talk about anything that's going on at their home group. And if there's business to discuss at the intergroup level for upcoming events or what's going on with the state of finances or whatever is going on with intergroup, that stuff can get decided by the delegates. Big when I was there, it was we were talking about. Remember when New York Intergroup rented this $250,000 Zoom account? So we were getting yelled and chewed out by the delegates for 10 months straight or about a year straight about why did we sign this stupid contract, and people were livid. And so that was most of the discussion in the early pandemic was how could we have how could we be owing $20,000 plus every month to Zoom for a use of a Zoom account? And so the deal though is like as an intergroup, like I was serving on the steering committee and then ultimately on the board of New York Intergroup. I am directly responsible to the groups of the New York City area that are doing service that are existing. And I'm directly responsible to those delegates of those groups. And I don't have a vote in those matters. When we have an intergroup delegates meeting and we're having a discussion about what's going on, if the delegates voted to do something, then we have to do it. We had signed up for they were offering all kinds of loans, financial hardship stuff from the early pandemic, and we had signed up for some loan, which I kind of disagreed with. Um, and yeah, Karan's talking about the AA group pamphlet. That's an amazing, amazing pamphlet to read through. Um, but so not to get too far into the intergroup stuff, because again, the intergroups don't exist in the service structure. I really want to talk about the AA general service structure. And maybe it'll become a little more apparent. But like, so we got into crazy contract. We got these loans and we're sitting there with this extra money laying on our books. And we brought it to the delegates towards the end of 2020 and we said, look, like we had signed up for this because it had been suggested that all nonprofits would be able to get access to these loans. We were given a cash, we were given a cash deposit of like $55,000 or something, and we feel like this is accepting money from an outside entity potentially, and is something we should consider. And our delegates all unanimously voted give the money back. And so we were sitting there as a board, but we were directly responsible to the members, and the members said, hey, that's 55 grand that you took from the government. That's an outside agency. They're not drunks. Give them their money back. We don't operate off of other people's money. And so we turned around and we sent $55,000 back to the government. Said, thank you for this loan. Thank you for approving us. We need to return this money because we actually don't need it. And so that's ultimately the subtext here is the board of trustees is directly responsible to us. Your delegate is responsible to you. You are not responsible to your delegate. That is what unorganization means. That the trustees work for you. As an AA member, whether you're 3 days into AA and are a new member or you've been here for 30 years, like the member is the top. And so we have this funny desires where we want to become a trustee or become a delegate. And it's like, man, where you sit at the top of the triangle, at the top of this inverted triangle is just being a member and your group is it. And so, there's no aspirations here that should be in effect for us to do. I mean, I think go serve, right? Get excited, go serve, but you're not getting more power. And you'll get more responsibility and you'll get some authority to discharge your responsibility. But that's getting into the concepts but at the end of the day, as a trusted servant in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're not organized where you're not going to become CEO and get a big salary and tell everybody what to do. You're going to end up working as a trustee in service, or you'll work as a delegate in service, and you will be the representative that gets to go out and stand and try to be representing your area or representing your district or representing your home group. And to me, that's a different thing, and it's a really beautiful thing. Go ahead, brother. Trusted servants is right. Karthik, you have your hand up again. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's this state called Tamil Nadu, and uh, and they had a big fight during trustee elections. It's almost like politics in that state. They have huge AA population, around 1,500 groups as compared to India. So the person who lost and their supporters started another GSO here, GSO India too. And
Amazing.
New York said, you can't have two GSOs in the country. You guys figure it out. Until then, we won't be supporting you. So
Right.
that's when everybody got together here and they had to solve it internally and take it back to GSO New York. So something like
Yep.
that happened here also. Yeah.
Amazing. And here's what that will look like. In our country, in US and Canada, AA dropped the ball on the copyright of its literature. So the first edition, I think the second edition, definitely the first, maybe the second edition too. Those are public domain. Like that's not copyrighted written material. So any publisher over here can print copies of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in the first edition and just sell them however they want if they use the writing as it was in the first edition. We still have the copyrights though on the later editions. I think that includes the second edition, but it was somewhere where there was a lapse at the board. They didn't fill in the paperwork and we lost it. Now, internationally, we still have the copyright for all of it. So outside of the US and Canada, when a general service office gets established, they would come to our to the New York General Service Office, and they would say, "Hey, here's the deal. Here's who we are, and we're going to see if we can get the rights to be able to print your literature and sell it over here." And so AA will license exclusive rights to print and publish its literature to the general service offices that they see are actually following and aligned. So in the sense of Mexico, there's been a guy, their second office that came up in Mexico and they were trying to print all of our literature. I mean, they did this, it was crazy. I mean, we sent like a raid squad. I mean, we didn't, AA didn't, but like, we were taking them, like pursuing legal action because they were trying to sell all this literature, and which is really that goes against a lot of other stuff. But um there's a real rub between fiduciary responsibility with the trustees and then not taking punitive action, which is also one of our warranties. So they I don't envy the job that they have to come to, um, or the decisions they have to come to. But so AA General Service Office could basically say we're not going to license another group entity that starts to say, hey, we're the General Service Office number 2 in India. They could say, hey, we're not going to license you the rights to print this literature because there's already a GSO. So you guys got to figure it out. And that sounds like that's what happened. Um, so I want to read a little bit from this essay because I think the essay also lays out what this is. Then I want to just dive into this long form a little bit more. But so to be clear, this whole thing about the inverted triangle and what does organization look like in AA and what does it mean to have a service committee and a service board? The general service board serves us. The steering committee and the board of my central office in New York Intergroup serves the groups. The groups don't serve the board. And that's what an organization looks like. If it was organized, the trustees would have that kind of power, but they don't, they serve. So let me read this really quick and then we'll go to Quran. They're talking about, Bill in the essay is talking about, we basically have uh, no authority at AA's headquarters. We could tell people like you are at perfect liberty to handle the matter any way you please, but the majority of experience in AA does seem to suggest dot 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 that we can, someone would reach out and say, what do you think about doing this? We can't tell anybody to not do anything. We could say, hey, our experience is it's not going to go well for you. So if you want to make use of our experience, probably don't do that. But you can do whatever you want. You're autonomous. You're self-governing. If you're a group and you want to go do it, you can. Here's all the reasons why maybe we think that's a bad idea, but if you want to do it, no one can stop you. And so I'm going to paraphrase the beginning of this. This is on my book. The 12 and 12 is page 174. It's the second to last page of Tradition 9. But basically, they're going, at this point, we hear people expressing that this is disobedience, that this is anarchy. And how could any of this work? And he goes, all these observers have overlooked something unique in Alcoholics Anonymous. To me, this is one of the greatest little bits in our literature, and it's buried in Tradition 9. I think it's amazing. Unless each AA member follows to the best of his ability our suggested 12 steps to recovery, he almost certainly signs his own death warrant. His drunkenness and disillusion are not penalties inflicted by people in authority. They result from his personal disobedience to spiritual principles. Pretty amazing. The same stern threat applies to the group itself. Unless there is approximate conformity to AA's 12 traditions, the group too can deteriorate and die. So we of AA do obey spiritual principles, first because we must, and ultimately because we love the kind of life such obedience brings. Great suffering and great love are AA's disciplinarians. We need no others. And then I'm going to finish out what his idea is. He goes, "It is clear now that we ought never to name boards to govern us, but it is equally clear that we shall always need to authorize workers to serve us. It is the difference between the spirit of vested authority and the spirit of service, two concepts which are sometimes poles apart. It is in the spirit of service that we elect the AA group's informal rotating committees, the intergroup association for the area, and the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous for AA as a whole. Even our foundation, once an independent board, is today directly accountable to our fellowship. So its trustees are the caretakers and expediters of our world services. Just as the aim of each AA member is personal sobriety, the aim of our services is to bring sobriety within reach to all who want it. So I think that's where we start to see what the difference is. But I mean, think of how amazing this is. If I go get drunk, that's not because somebody in authority did something to me. If I go get drunk, that's because I've been disobedient to spiritual principles. As an alcoholic whose life depends upon developing a relationship with the God of my understanding and seeking a source of power, if I don't do that because I'm disobedient to that and I get drunk, I have nobody to blame. And he goes on to say that's the same with the group. If the group doesn't adhere in some way to these traditions, the group probably won't make it. And that's why we created these traditions in the first place. That's why Bill saw the necessity because AA was falling apart. And the idea that we have two disciplinarians. It's not my sponsor, it's not my disciplinarian. It's great suffering. It's alcohol is the great persuader. Why would I come in here and seek God? Why would I come in here and try to have the humility to look at all these different traditions and principles and change who I am and and seek to be changed? Because alcohol's out there. The reason we don't need to organize AA is because we have an illness that will just kill us if we don't actually take this stuff serious. So we don't have to be in AA policing each other because alcohol's out there waiting. And and to me that's what a gift that I don't have to be beholden to any person in AA because alcohol is my great persuader. And then what is great love? I think we've all experienced great love. I think we've all experienced forgiveness on some level. We've all come into AA completely broken usually. And what I don't know, I mean, I get to be the greeter at my home group on our Monday night meeting. So last night I stood at the front door, and as people came to the door, I put my hand out and I said, "Welcome, my name's Devin. What, if I didn't know him, what's your name? Welcome. There's coffee and tea inside. Go grab a seat." Um, most of the people I know because there's a steady group of people, but there's some new faces, and I get to introduce myself to them and welcome them into the group. And if you're walking in and you've been asked to leave everywhere you've been for the last couple of years or last couple of weeks and you've blown your life up, the idea that somebody's welcoming you in and extending a warm hand and saying, "Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you don't want to drink, you don't ever have to." And then if you need some help, we can get together, we can grab a coffee, or we can sit down and grab a meal, and we can take a look at how to recover, and I can show you what I've done. To me, that's great love. The love of Alcoholics Anonymous is the journey that we're all on together in helping one another one day at a time to seek a relationship with the God of our understanding and actually find the freedom that's available. And so we don't have to be yelling at each other. We don't have to have rules and regulations and human resources departments and all this kind of red tape and crap that exists or yellow tape that exists in the corporate world. Because why? Because we have an illness that will take us out. And this is all an opportunity for us to learn about some humility. And the more I learn about humility and the more I try to start seeking a relationship with my creator, the less self-centered and selfish I've become because I've been changed here and I'm not the same person. And so to me, this is one of those traditions that encompasses all of that. All right, go ahead, Karan, and then we'll get into this long form.
Yeah, I might be digressing a bit, so pardon me for that, but I really like to know more about what you have to say on this tradition. But my question is pertaining to um, the group structure and how we fit in to the larger service structure.
Sure.
Because, yeah, I'll just give you some context. the fellowship that I come from, we are fitted into the larger service structure. But as a group, we are just meeting places. We have a GSR because we need a GSR to vote for a delegate. But that's as limited as we are in our functioning. But so I just wanted to know how a really healthy group which follows traditions participates in doing service at the level of the group, having representatives for all the positions of that, and how they all fit into the larger service structures. Like, how does that flow in? So if you can just give some experience from your end, so we can have some vision towards which we can work for.
Sure. So I'll give a little bit of my vision, which has come to me from, I mean, really, I listened to Tom Ivester talk about how they organized his group in North Carolina. It inspired me a lot. And it's something he's got some stuff that I've wanted to try to bring to my home group, but I kind of feel like it would be impossible because I just think it would be asking for too many extra service positions. But at the end of the day, like the group is its own entity, right? And so the group sends representatives to either the intergroup meetings, if there's intergroup meetings, or to the area, to the district. We have a GSR that attends our district meetings. We also, our current district committee chair, our DCM of my district, is also a member of my home group. The chair of our district, or the treasurer rather of our district, is a member of my home group. So my home group is just, we had a district that had fallen out where we didn't have a lot of people doing service, and recently a member started kind of reaching out to groups and trying to get this going, and now a chunk of people at my home group um, that served on the steering committee of my home group, and we're time to rotate. They said, hey, let's try to get this district going. And so we have a district that's becoming active again after not being active for a good bit, which is really amazing. And we've got some other groups, and so, but all the group really would do is show up at your district meeting. If there's an intergroup in your intergroup central office has meetings where they're talking about what's going on in intergroup, send a delegate. Now, if you wanted to go a step further and consider how could my group, and so here's the thing, what are those entities trying to do? It's what I read in that last little bit of this essay, that just as the aim of each AA member is personal sobriety, the aim of our services is what? To bring sobriety within reach of all who want it. So when we're getting involved in service outside of the home group, it's not always that I'm going to be doing the sponsorship type thing, or that I'm going to be working steps with people. What I'm trying to get involved with usually in being the co-op, like the CPC chair for my area. My job as a CPC chair, which is cooperation with professional communities, was to try to reach out to and get into touch with professionals and let them know that AA exists. Hey, you might find drunks in your workspace, and did you know that Alcoholics Anonymous has all these resources that are for fun and for free in your area, and maybe you could benefit from, I could just come in and let you know what that looks like, and give you some access to all this stuff. And so service there's a lot of committees. Our area has a bunch of committees. If I look forward beyond the inverted triangle, you'll see this. This is the General Service Conference Committee structure. And you see, again, the AA group at the top, and then this thing. And now you go to conference committees, and you've got agenda, finance, corrections, literature, trustees, CPC, treatment and accessibilities, public. That's a bunch of committees. So my area has a bunch of those committees as well. And your home group could, if you had enough people interested, your home group could say, hey, maybe we should send a home group member to each one of those committees. So we have a member of our group actively attending those committee meetings to find out, well, what is the corrections committee in my area doing? What do they need? Maybe they need people to help work on getting some information gathered so we can start moving in a different direction to do more work. Well, maybe they need people. Why couldn't those people come from my group? Maybe so it would really be about getting opportunities for service that could be brought back to your home group to say, hey, our area public information committee is doing a thing where we're trying to track down as many different hospitals and mental health centers and crisis centers and homeless shelters. We're trying to get all those contacts together and compiled into one database so that then we can get a mailing together and like send this packet that we've put together about AA and the resources that are available to all these people. But we need people to help kind of track all these places down and call them and see if they're whatever it is. That would be potentially a lot of work. And if one person is trying to do that, it's not going to go well. But if 15 AA members got on that thing, you could probably get a lot of information quickly, right? And so those committees should be the most important parts of our area service structure. And the work that the committees are doing, they a lot of times they'll be putting on workshops, or they have presentations to go to, or they're working on a mailing, or they're trying to sort out whatever it is. Same thing with the intergroup. There's committees that are intergroup. So I would say, as a group, if you want to get more connected, the goal of service is to bring service opportunities back to the group and to the AA member. And so if you have a member that would be willing to reach out to the committee chairs of your area and find out, what do you guys have a meeting? When is that meeting? Do you do committee work for corrections? Do you do committee work for literature? Our literature chair at the area basically gets asked to sell literature at all these different events that happen all over our area. Sometimes there's a couple of events that overlap and he can't he can't go to both. But if there was a committee of some other people, he could say, hey, let me give you some of the literature that I have. Would you be able to go and sell literature at this, event for that district? They're putting on an afternoon workshop and they asked us to come over with some stuff, and if he's got, another workshop or something else to do and they're hundreds of miles apart. So, having the committees, the idea there is that's opportunities for service. And so as a home group, you could look to, and this is what Tom did in North Carolina. His group organized, and there was about 8 guys or 9 guys that got together and said, we're going to start our own group. And they realized that they had enough people to put one member on every single committee at their area. And so that was baked into the formation of that home group, was they weren't just going to have a general service rep and intergroup delegate, but they were going to make each one of those committees for the area a position and have a member of their home group in those committees, so that when there was events, when there was service opportunities or a call for we need people to do this, that information was going to get brought back and shared about at their business meeting, or shared about in, by a raised hand and any kind of additional AA announcements. Boom, here's one. Corrections committee is doing a workshop on how to better carry the message behind the walls. It's going to be X date and they need a hospitality committee. If anybody's interested in helping put the coffee together and deal with the lunch, I'm taking a list and I'm going to, that kind of thing. So those would all be ways that, again, we're not organized, but that would be some of the stuff that as a home group you could look to. How can we be more involved? There's so much service that needs to get done in AA. Now, I've tried to think about this and want to pitch this to my home group. I'm not sure they're going to go for it. If you've been a member of a home group for a while, you'll notice that the hardest positions usually to fill are to get a GSR that actively shows up to the area assemblies, to get an intergroup delegate that goes to the intergroup meetings and brings that information back. Then a lot of meetings over here, they don't even want to hear the report. It gets time for the GSR report and they go, all right, Joe, you got 3 minutes. And then it's 3 minutes is done. Joe, sorry, next time, and they don't want to hear it. And so that doesn't help either. But so I think those are some of the ideas of, put people on these committees, send members to do stuff. And then those members can come back and report back to the group what's going on, and be involved as much as we can in trying to make sure that AA is available to whoever needs it. And that is more the service that we're talking about. If you see the coin that has the recovery, unity, and service, the 3 legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the circle and triangle, that's the kind of service that they're talking about. Somewhere along the lines, we started conflating sponsorship as service. And I'm a big, loud opponent that sponsorship is not service. It is one of our steps. For me to personally recover is to go carry the message to another alcoholic. That is part of my recovery legacy. That is not part of the service legacy of Alcoholics Anonymous. The service legacy of Alcoholics Anonymous is there's a bunch of jobs in AA that as a member, if I don't stand up and do them, they won't get done. And part of that is because of this tradition that says we're unorganized. You know, you got to volunteer to get it done. You got to get in there. And so let's look. They talk about the AA group needs the least possible organization. Now I'm just looking at the long form of the tradition. Rotating leadership is best. So we talk a lot about rotation. You'll hear some of the older trustees say there's two things that are for certain in this world, and that's death and rotation. Or maybe the third one is death, taxes, and rotation. So AA feels that rotation is best. We've talked about being ego-driven people. In our second tradition, if you remember, we talked about what does it look like to be an elder statesman versus a bleeding deacon. The bleeding deacon is the elder member of AA that thinks that the group can't get on without him. This right here in the ninth tradition says the best form of leadership is rotating leadership. That we don't put one person and get them stuck in. That we don't have that CEO that that serves for 30 years as the head of the enterprise. That's not good for the AA member putting in that kind of long-term service, because the AA member will probably think they're more important than other members. But also, the best way to get new ideas and fresh life into AA is to open us up to new people taking over. On a personal level, rotation shows me that I am not that important. I've chaired my home group for 2 years. I was the overall chair. I served 4 years on the steering committee. I've been a member of that group for going on 11 years now. I'm the greeter today. I stand out in the cold in 30 degrees last night, talking with a couple other people, putting my hand out and welcoming people into the meeting. I'm not that important. And learning what it means to take on a role of responsibility and then stepping away is an incredible experience. To learn that I'm not that important. For someone who thinks very highly of themselves and thinks I have the answer to everything, it was an amazing opportunity to learn how to let go. I did a bunch for that 2 years, and I still do a lot for my home group. And anything that happens at that group, I have an interest in it. And I'm one of the elders. I've been there about as long as anybody, if not the longest consecutive. I'm the longest consecutive sitting member in my home group. It's been around for 14 years. I've been there for almost 11. And all the founders and people have ultimately moved away. But I am not important. Air quotes. I'm not more important than anybody because I've been there and I've done all the service. I served and then I rotated. And we found that that's best. And now as rotation happens, new population comes in, the group can flourish. Go ahead, Karan, and then I'll keep rolling on this.
Yeah. So again, my question is specific to the experience that I keep having with the local fellowship and the groups and the home group. So a lot of awareness in the fellowship about the traditions, the structure, and all these things. But everyone are distributed, right? To just give you an example, I'm one guy in a group of 6 people who wants to do something from following the advices of the literature and set up these committees, and I have the spirit to do that. And I have friends in the fellowship from different home groups, each one from a different home group and from faraway places in the city, who share the same spirit. But for whatever reasons, we are not able to come together and form a group which actively gets deep down into the service that the literature talks about. So at the end of the day, the effective A group service that is the major chunk of our third legacy. We are not able to function. So we are stagnating as a fellowship. We are stagnating as groups. We are opening up more meeting places, but what we are not doing anything as a group service. So, but what I believe is we have to come together, people who share the same spirit. And what you said, you quoted your friend's example, like they had 8 people and they sent all the 8 people into those different committees. We don't have those committees, but we have to start maybe a group, maybe then it will spread. but there's no unit that's happening. So, any thoughts on that?
Well, I will say I feel like that this is starting to be like the question that everybody has. Like, why can't we either attract people to do service is a big one over here that people just don't want to get involved, or how do we grow? And it's not, I mean, you guys, as far as timeline, it still feels like you're kind of in the adolescent phase, right? Like India's general service structure has not been around nearly as long as, this one over here, because this is like the beginning. And so some of it's just going to be the growing pains of trying to figure it out. And there's something also beautiful about, I don't have to take everybody that's fired up and put them into one group. But perhaps if we have people from different groups that are willing to come together and try to just get some stuff going, that can actually be great. So it's like if you have friends and people that are interested in wanting to see this thing go, just trying to be encouraging each other, and join a committee yourself and then see what you can do and then have that experience, and maybe your experience inspires somebody else to go, man, Karan joined that corrections committee and they got a few meetings going into those jails, and like I got to go speak there and that was awesome, and like, there's some stuff maybe I could do, or whatever it is. It's like, I think with all of it, the idea here is as a member, you're empowered to go and do whatever you want. If you see an opportunity to do some service, like go after it. And if you can get more people involved, great. And the reality is the delegates of the area they could try to come to you and tell you you're not allowed to do that. I mean, here's an example. The Corrections and Treatment Facilities Committee at New York Intergroup has historically been a really great committee, done a ton of service and really organized a bunch of stuff. Now we have a member or two that really went in and started making a commitment happen. They like reached out to a facility and said, "Hey, I'm like an AA member and I'm trying to see if you guys need a meeting." And they said, "Yeah, we need a meeting." And so they started going once a week to this detox. And then we set up a thing at a prison in Brooklyn. We got it going. We started getting a group of people together and we said, "Hey, like we want to let you know this is happening." And the response from the corrections chair when we got to them was trying to tell us that this isn't how it works and this you can't do it like that. And we just had to lovingly let her know, like, thank you for your concern that this isn't how it works. But had you been doing your service commitment, you would have already been to this facility and had it going. You didn't. We did. You work for us. We're telling you this is happening. So you can do with that whatever you want. And it might sound silly, but I mean, sometimes people just need to understand, like, there is no, this is how it goes. It's AA. If I'm a member and I got out there and I started service and I got I have a guy sponsor who will do that. He'll move to a new spot, and he reached out to some of these facilities and he said, "Hey, look, I'm an AA member. I'm new in town and I'm trying to find out if there's a facility that's interested in having a weekly meeting to do like a workshop and an AA meeting." And he's got one of them bit. And one of those facilities said, "We'd love to have you." And so Monday nights, Dylan goes out with a big book and he does a workshop on 12 steps in this facility every week. And, he met a guy who was at the intergroup that was like doing that stuff. And, that guy was saying whatever to him. And he said, "Well, why don't you just come and see what we're doing?" And then that guy came to was invited to the meeting and got to see what Dylan was doing. And then was like, "Man, I think maybe we could do some step work." There was a whole story there. But the reality is, we're not organized, meaning as a member, if you want to get something going, go do it. It's maybe best to consult with your committees and find out how people do things, because I'm not trying to step on toes either. In the spirit of our fourth tradition of being self-governing and trying to be a good neighbor, I'm not here just trying to ego drive me into doing a bunch of service. But if there's some stuff that I want to get going, like get going and see what happens. And then if you get something started, you can try to rotate out, get some other people involved and step away, and then go on to the next. And if you got a group of people that are equally fired up and want to get some stuff done, it's like maybe you guys can talk and just be the inspiration for each other to go try to join an area committee and see what happens. pick one and go to the meeting and find out what they're talking about. Maybe you find it piques your interest, maybe not. But it's like we can go and do those things and get involved in service and find out. And what I found is if you're willing to do something and you show up in AA to a service meeting and you say, I'm here and I just want to help, they'll give you a ton of stuff to go do because they need you. Um, well, so let me read through the end of this before we get too sidetracked. But these are great questions. And I don't mean sidetrack because the other thing is, oh, yeah, Natasha, do you not know how to raise your hand? Or just unmute and interrupt me?
Uh, Hi, Devin. Hi, Karan. Uh, just to add on with what Karan has actually mentioned about this, unless we are deviating from the topic, it's should I proceed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I mean with my limited uh, fellowship experience, what I found is we are into that vicious cycle of whether chicken or egg kind of. We don't have people to work in service dedicatedly, and plus we don't have the kind of organization. There is some kind of organization definitely I feel is required uh, as far as Hyderabad AA is concerned. That is what it, with my limited experience I could say. So how do we break this cycle? Because I feel there are only very handful, or you can just count on a few fingers, that people who are actually interested and a little dedicated and committed towards service. There are very few, I would say.
Say it over here
So,
too.
and there are not many members also coming in. Fresh blood is not coming in big numbers. So neither this is happening nor that is happening. So we are stuck up in a endless loop as a Hyderabad entirety is concerned.
So a couple of thoughts. One is I would say common. Let's think about my area. In my area, there's over 1,500 registered groups. When we have an area assembly, if we get 200 people, we're like, we got a lot of people. That's a very small amount compared to how many groups we have, right? So we're not, the service participation in AA, it tends to be minuscule. And I think a big part of that, and this is just my own theorizing, so this is not AA, this is just this is Devin's thoughts, right? Devin's thoughts are somewhere along the journey here with the general service structure and service as a whole, we've kind of lost the plot on connecting this to 12-step work. That the reason that we're doing service and getting together in these committees and doing what feels like these long business meetings is to allow 12-step work to happen and to facilitate people being able to find Alcoholics Anonymous and get sober. And I think if we're able to bridge that gap where we can start to see that the committee work that we're doing or the work of the assemblies is actually turning into people actually coming to AA and getting to stay sober and opportunities for that to take place, then I think we get more participation. If we can tie it to primary purpose and our 12 step. I think if we're and then so then the other side is history is I think huge when you look at the amount of does AA grow or not. If you read A Vision for You in that little bit where they give some history, Bill talks about finally in June of 1935, Dr. Bob goes out after a bender, after being sober for about a month or 6 weeks or so, like a month. He goes out on a bender and he comes back and he wakes up that next morning, goes to do a surgery, and then he goes and he makes amends all over town. And then he never drank again till he died. And they talk about how that was the beginning. And there was two alcoholics in Akron, Ohio. And then they talk about the man in the bed, the third man, Bill Dotson. And he was the lawyer who was, getting restrained down because he kept fighting with all the nurses in the hospital and yelling at him and spitting on him. And they called Bill and Bob over to go talk to this guy. And he ended up getting struck sober, and he got sober for the rest of his life. And then a little bit down, they start talking about, Ernie Galbraith. They got the Devil May Care chap, AA number 4. And Ernie went on to marry Dr. Bob's daughter. So you could talk about some sponsorship abuse right there. but so they start talking about these couple of early people. And on the bottom of the next page, I don't remember what page that is in Vision for You. It's 150. It might be like 156, 154. They say 18 months later, those three had succeeded with 7 more. Let's think about that. A year and a half it went. It took Bill Wilson, Bill Dodson, and Dr. Bob being the 3 guys, and in a year and a half, they now had 10. So the thing about AA is it's, where did we get the massive spike was when some articles went out in some major publications. There was a magazine or publication in Cleveland called the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and they did an article because Cleveland became a pretty big hotbed, and it was in like 1939. They did an article or something like that, and they got about 800 inquiries from that. And then there was a piece in Liberty magazine that went out, I think. And then the big one was a guy named Jack Alexander, who was like an investigative reporter for the Saturday Evening Post. And he was sent to investigate Alcoholics Anonymous for what kind of nefarious thing is really going on over there. And he spent some time in Akron, and I think in maybe Cleveland too, with all some of these early members, and maybe New York. But he went around and met with a bunch of AA members, and after a couple of months of hanging out and looking at what was going on, came to the conclusion that Alcoholics Anonymous was actually people giving of themselves for fun and for free just so they could help each other. And he wrote a piece in the Saturday Evening Post, which basically quadrupled our membership in the early 40s. We shot up to 8,000 from maybe having 2,000 people at that point. So AA had a few moments where the membership went crazy, but it's really leveled off now. And I think it's leveled off now a lot because now, the professional treatment industry for the last 30, 40 years, since the 70s, about 50 years now, the business of recovery has been, that's taken such a massive thing. It's a billion dollar industry, billions and billions of dollars globally to all sorts of healthcare and people, so if I've got a friend or a family member that's struggling, I'm going to probably think that sending them to detox and to an inpatient rehab is where you send people. So the work that might be super important, I think, of AA, number one is CPC and public information. Are the medical professionals that are in this industry aware that AA exists in their community? There's a lot of work, I think, to do on that front. And I think AA in general has kind of fallen really short. This is my own opinion. We're getting into Devin's opinions or thoughts, not necessarily rooted in what's going on. But I think that's one of the hardest things we've had to deal with, is that we didn't necessarily adopt or adjust what this industry was growing in a way that allowed us to keep pace with them. Now, there's a lot of obviously AA members or people that are sober that know about 12-step recovery, that work in mental health and work in these places, but not all. And some places, basically get paid because they are not a 12-step based recovery program. So if you don't want the 12 steps, come to us, we'll get you sober. And that's fine too, right? We don't have it's like we don't have a monopoly here. This is what works for some of us, and we think it'll work for all of us that do it. But if you want to do something else, go for it. But so in the beginning, I think, one of the things to look at is like, hey, is there a way that I can get involved in my community? Are there meetings or places, or maybe we can go and approach and find out if we can get an AA group in there? Are there shelters that would want an AA meeting once a week? And maybe my group would be interested in trying to put a meeting for my home group, not a commitment, but maybe my home group could say, we're going to do a Thursday night meeting and we're going to do it at the shelter. And it's open to anybody who wants to come, but it's going to be there. And so we can announce it to everybody who's in that population if they want to come in. That would be part of the conversation with the facility if they would allow that kind of thing. maybe the facility won't allow a bunch of people from the street to come into their space. That's a real consideration. But in the beginning, it's like the book talks about, if we can't find people that want to recover, we go search out the newcomer. And so this is where the corrections and treatment facilities commitments are huge, because that's us going to try to find us. And that's where CPC, you can go and talk to judges. We should be talking to judges and law enforcement and bail bondsmen and school superintendents and all that stuff. And we should be going to the people at the top and saying, hey, we're in your community. This is how you can find us. Here's my info. If you find somebody that has a problem with alcohol, they could call me, and I will take them to a meeting and try to connect them with those of us that are sober in this town. And that's ways that, like, AA grew in the beginning. It was AA members showing up and letting people know that we existed, and here we are. And that's not breaking our anonymity, which we're going to start getting into what is the anonymous part as we get to the end of these traditions. The anonymity of Alcoholics Anonymous is not that I'm hiding from my community as a recovered alcoholic, but it's that I just, I don't go out and label myself in the public as an alcoholic or a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because then I start to potentially look like I'm speaking for AA. In here, I'm starting to share my opinions, because I think traditions, these are observational, experiential, and sometimes are going to have our own opinions attached. But my opinions may not jive with what everybody thinks, and they're my opinions. They're not necessarily always going to be in line with where AA is headed. I might have some conflicting ideas there. And so if I'm in the public and like on a newspaper, or I'm getting an interview on a TV show, and I'm a member of AA and I'm spouting off about who knows what, then 2 years later I'm in some other thing and people remember, oh, that's the AA guy, right? And then I am drunk driving, arrest for relapsed. They're gonna go, oh, AA doesn't work. Or they're going to think AA embodies maybe the crazy idea that I was spouting off on some TV show, right? And so, but that's different than getting out in my community and letting people in my immediate vicinity know, like, hey, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've recovered from alcoholism. And if you've got a family member or a friend or a coworker or somebody in your organization that might need to talk to one of us, it looks like they got a problem, we're out here, and here's how you can find us. Here's the website here's some meeting books. Here's my phone number. Here's a couple of other phone numbers, of other members that would be happy to meet somebody. And if you have somebody you think might want some help, we'd be here, and that's the kind of stuff. I think it's really that grassroots stuff. And I think you just wrote, but like we read the preface and the forewords last night at my home group. And one of the things that my buddy Grayson talked about was, we exist in a time that Alcoholics Anonymous exists. And in the grand scheme of human evolution, there's a 90-year window that there has been any kind of hope for an alcoholic to actually really recover with quantifiable results. You do this, you can recover. That's never existed for the millennia that humanity has been here. And that's incredible. And if you look around the world, all the fellowships start with one member or two people getting together and identifying with each other and trying to help each other. And at some point, one or two people decide that that's a group, and they start meeting with some regularity, and they make it publicly known that this is where you can find us. And they keep meeting until they get a third. And then those three go out and they try to find a fourth. And that they're, I think we will get to this idea that it has to go really big, really fast. It has to be this and the reality is it's the slow, put my head down, not seeking any kind of recognition, just trying to show up and find a drunk to help, and show up to my home group and realize that maybe the drunks that are hurting are the ones that have some time sober, because we all need help from time to time. We're not all doing great all the time. And that work that keeps the group together so that all of us that are sober can still stay sober is going to allow the potential for more people to find us and more people to get sober. And if, as long as we're keeping our groups whole, which is where this whole thing goes back to unity, as long as I'm keeping my group intact and I'm keeping my personality in check so that we don't tear ourselves apart, as long as AA exists in my town, then we have a shot to get the next one. And over time, maybe 20 years or 10 years, if we keep getting the next one, and then that guy maybe gets the next one, if we all replace ourselves once over in 10 years' time, that's a lot of people that might show up and end up being here. In 100 years, we might really see an impact. In 200 years, we might just have enough critical mass that you can't really ever get rid of us. So I think, that's kind of, in my mind, that's like the idyllic vision here. Is I came in here and I was the recipient of a gift, so it's my responsibility to show up and figure out how to play well in the sandbox with my home group. And if there's a job to do, I'm going to try to show up and do the job. You need me to go to the prison or go to the hospital, try to find us. You need me to speak in this other town and drive 30 minutes. You need me to drive 2 hours to that meeting out in Pennsylvania. I'll go. If I have the time and my wife says you can go, I'll go. Because I owe my life to Alcoholics Anonymous. The gifts that I get to live, the problems of my life that I get to endure today are not problems, my problems. It's like I get to experience all this stuff and have, oh, what do I do about this bill? I have a car. Oh, I have a car payment. It sucks. Dude, I have a car in my own name. I have a lease on an apartment that doesn't have a cosigner. Like these are things that I could not achieve. And today I get to experience them. I want to get Quran and then what I'm feeling, and call me crazy because it feels like we're kind of getting to the end here of the time, and we've dropped off to the core group of us here that really mean business. All those other schlubs don't mean business. We'll have to edit that recording out. But what I was feeling is maybe what we'll do is we could pick this back up and we'll do like part 2 of 9 and get into 10 next week. But it feels like there's still a bunch that I want to look at in this thing. And this is one of those that gets to be a lot. So maybe we could, we'll take another question, but we can also then pick up where we are and not chintz out on the ninth tradition. But go ahead, Karan.
Yeah. So mine was not specifically a question. I just wanted to know, obviously, you have a lot more to share on this tradition, and also we can also look into how this tradition plays out into other areas of life, in family,
Right.
in work. So I just wanted to know your views on that. So as you said, probably we can make it in the next week.
Yeah, I was thinking because that would be all that is exactly where I want to get towards. Like the long form talks more about what this stuff is. I think there's more to talk about with just the general service conference structure and just how that stuff operates, because I find that fascinating, and some of the history there, as well as what do we mean in our personal lives. And I mean, here's the overview. Here's how Mike wrote this for the overview. A family or a relationship should be pliable in its organization, but our group conscience may appoint certain persons responsible to serve various functions. Meaning as a family, we got to have some kind of organization, and certain people are going to have certain jobs. I might be the husband, or the father or the mother, or both parents are going to be the ones that deal with making the money. And then as a result of making the money, you probably are going to have the responsibility of sorting out how you spend that money over your children. But perhaps there's going to be a little bit of organization, but we also want to say, hey, the group conscience here is, if we're going to do a family vacation, we're going to figure that out with everybody. We're not just going to tell you, here's what we're doing. Once maybe the kids get a little older, and maybe you sit down, you say, we could do the beach thing, we could go skiing, or up to the cold, like what kind of a trip do we want to take this year? Here's about the budget we have, if we think there's something, and so we can start looking at how do we want to organize this thing. In the friend group, how do we organize the friend group? So there's a lot of food for thought with that stuff. But yeah, to me, I mean, this goes back to, God shows up in the group conscience. We serve, we don't govern. And so here we're seeing that there is no governing body of AA. There's only the spirit of service. And I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole of my sadness, because I feel like AA is in a lot of trouble over here. And some of the long form, it says, our tradition, the custodians of our traditions are our general service board. And frankly, I just don't see from the board over here, it might be different with your board, but our board does not seem to even understand the principles of our traditions or the principles of our steps. They don't seem to even understand the recovery program that the fellowship was built around that they serve, based on how they're approaching and telling us what they're doing. We've been hemorrhaging money left and right, and the membership is getting pissed. And people that have served on our board that are no longer on the board are starting to have to stand up and be vocal in opposition to some of the decisions that are happening. And it's not a rosy forecast. And our fellowship over here is really headed for trouble. And we have a deep need for a real group conscience about what AA's function is and how we can best serve the alcoholic who still suffers, and how did we kind of move into this organization where we are feeling more like we're organized and less like we're doing service. But so maybe we'll pin it there and we'll pick up in the long form, and then we can look at the relationship stuff, and then we'll probably be able to move into 10 then next week also. But so we don't lose any of this. But this is where it gets confusing. The fact that intergroups and central offices don't exist in the actual service structure, and how does this all relate to each other, to me is fascinating. Because again, I just walked into a meeting and there it was. And there was books, and there was the meeting book. I didn't know the meeting book wasn't printed by the same people that printed the books, and that there was, all that kind of stuff. I learned that through experience, and I've served in all those different capacities that, taken the jobs and said, I'll do it. But why don't we close this out with a responsibility statement into a serenity prayer? Who's responsible? I am responsible.
Wow. Responsible.
When anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible.
I'm responsible.
God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not ours, be done.
Yeah, thank you, Devin.
Thank you, Devin.
Quickly,